I think the hardest thing we can do is to walk away from our ego.
And I had to crash with the realization that I can't do it.
We don't know really what unconditional love is.
And part of this second step is letting go of the fact that I have no control over the approval of God.
Walking the 12 steps and getting to know Scripture has brought fresh insights and experiences of personal growth to George Mann and Dick Rice. These good friends are prepared to share these experiences with you in this second in a series of programs on the spirituality of the 12 steps of AA. Dr. George Mann is Medical Director of St. Mary's Chemical Dependency Services in Minneapolis. Father Dick Rice is the Director of Loyola Spiritual Direction Center in St. Paul, Minnesota.
George, I would like to anticipate and preview the second step with what for me is a marvelous second step moment in the New Testament. It's from the 24th chapter of Luke's Gospel. Jesus has just arisen. As he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. They were still incredulous for sheer joy and wonder. So Jesus said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?"
As the first step spoke of our basic humanity, some of the issues that we need to face, the second step addresses us as creatures, talks about our dependence on God. The second step says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity.
Well, I'm amazed at things that look so insane in other people's lives. How the wife of an alcoholic could be hiding bottles for years, explaining things away to an employer, or how a workaholic could be working 120 hours a week. Things that would look so insane in other people's lives look so sane in my life.
Absolutely. If I'm if I'm working 80 hours a week, because that's what my job requires. It absolutely requires 80 hours a week. And I'm using the income from that 80 hours a week to take care of my family, to ensure their future. And if you come along and tell me that that is insane, well, I certainly wouldn't believe anything like that. So you're right, that there's a process that occurs within us called delusion. And delusion and insanity go hand in hand. Delusion is the doorway to insanity. The more I become deluded about myself, about you, about my family, about my job, about the world, about what I need out of life, then the closer I move to insanity.
And the delusion, I find, so often has to do with the power that I think I have, especially over other people. Mm-hmm. A power, for instance, to be able to stop a parent's drinking. Mm-hmm. A power to ensure that if I stay awake, all the kids will get home safe. Mm-hmm. So when it's coming to believe that there's a power greater than myself, what I find in coming to the second step is, gee, I really didn't think there was any power greater than myself. And all of a sudden it's brought home, I can't control mm-hmm. what I thought I could control. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten kind of crazy.
You see, what you just did there is you integrated the first and the second step. And I think it's important for people to recognize that none of these steps exist in isolation by themselves. There is a sequence. One leads to another. As we become able to give up our ego, our attachment to our ego, mm-hmm. You know, what an important, powerful, wonderful, dynamic, controlling, manageable person I am. As I begin to move away from that, only then can I begin to see there is a power greater than myself who can restore me to the harmony that we refer to, mm-hmm. To reality, to the world. Spiritual growth is that. Spiritual growth is coming more and more into harmony, into recognition, into the affirmation of who I am, who you are, who God is, and what that relationship is.
The only thing I'd add is that that moving away that you talk about can sound a little bit like a dance step. For me, it was a resounding crash. I didn't realize the extent to which I had deluded myself into thinking that I was powerful enough to stop a parent's drinking. And I had to crash with the realization that I can't do it. So it was my own Good Friday and empty Holy Saturday that ever led to the beginning, the coming to believe, just coming to believe that Easter is here, that there is a power greater than myself, that a risen God is there to work on my behalf and on behalf of this loved one.
Even though I know what you just said, for me, the dance continues. After 20 years of working through these steps, I can still get hooked into my ego. I can still be trapped by all the things that trap my ego. And while I'm in that trap, while I take that giant step backward, which I do regularly, I can still believe at that time, as that delusion has control and power over me, that I am that powerful, controlling person. And so, for me, it's moving in and out of it. And what I hope to do is to be able to, as I move along, to spend more time in it than out of it, and recognize that there is some progress. I think the hardest thing we can do is to walk away from our ego, because I think fear is so dominant when we try to shed that ego. I'm not talking about the kind of classical sense of egocentricity, selfishness, or certainly those things are there, but to recognize that who I am, who I have believed myself to be, is not that kind of a person, not that important, not that significant, not that powerful. I think that the more inadequate we are, the more anxiety we experience, the more frightening and threatening the world is, the more we need to grab on to that delusion of ego and strength and power.
Well, one of the things that I so often find get coupled in myself and others who I'm with is a fear of failure, as though I've got to succeed, and coupled with that is a fear of rejection, as though your acceptance of me depends on my success. So I have to be powerful enough to bring it off, whatever it is, if I'm going to be accepted by you. So I've got to keep bringing it off. And then to realize that when I can't bring it off anymore, that I haven't been thoroughly rejected. And those two get kind of uncoupled, they get unhooked, that, gee, I haven't succeeded as I would have liked to have succeeded, but I'm still accepted. Not by everyone, not always as I would have liked to have been, but certainly by higher power.
I think a key, when you just said it, by a higher power, in that our experience, our human experience, going back to our parents, our brothers and sisters, our wives, our friends, is that the fact is that we are not universally accepted. We don't know really what unconditional love is. Our common experience is that we have love with a hook. Love that says you will be gauged, you will be judged by your performance from the time we're little children. If you're a good boy, if you're a good girl, if you do these things, then your mother and father will love you. If you don't, then you run in danger of their rejection. When someone comes along and says there is a higher power that doesn't operate that way. And we are to turn our lives over to that higher power. And we need to give up our control and our ego and all of those things in order to connect a hook with that higher power. That's a difficult thing for us to do. It's out of our human experience. And of course, the more of those negative human experiences we have had, the harder that transition is. The harder it is to let go. There's the, the old saying, let go and let God. Very, very sound, very basic attitude. And of course, the second step says, what we need to let go of is our insanity. Our insanity may be alcoholism, maybe drug addiction, maybe workaholism, maybe gambling, maybe a whole range of things. And we need to give that up. And so much of our ego is invested in that. That's who I am. That to give that up and put it into the hands of this unknown, all-accepting higher power is a very frightening thing for most of us to do.
Very frightening. Very frightening. It's too good to be true, like the resurrection of Jesus is just too good to be true. I was really struck when a few years ago now, the American bishops gathered for the first time in their summer gathering up here at Collegeville. They invited Cardinal Hume from England. And as I've heard it anyway, the one story that Cardinal Hume told when he arose every morning at morning prayer to preach as the spiritual director of that gathering, the one story that every bishop who has been there tells me anyway is that he looked at the assembled bishops this one time and he said, I'm going to tell you a story that that might be hard to believe, but all my life I have thought of myself as a little boy with his hand in the cookie jar. Just where all of us know we always could be. And I've always thought of God coming upon me, seeing fully what I was doing, knowing full well what I was about, slapping my hand and putting the cookie in the cookie jar. But then he kind of twinkled, as only an Englishman can twinkle at the bishops, and he said, you know, I've had a conversion, though, in the last years. I have realized that I really am that little boy with my hand in the cookie jar, and there's no getting around that. If I haven't done it on any given day, I'm capable of it, taking all I can for myself. But the big difference is God comes upon me, knows full well what I'm doing, only he smiles. And he says to me, Basil, why don't you take two? Why don't you take two? And just the way that strikes people who have heard that story reminds me that it is so hard to believe in a higher power that takes us on our good days or our bad days, whether we've failed or succeeded, because we haven't known, humanly speaking, that unconditional love that you mentioned we all crave, are born with. I think it's our taste for God.
And I think out of that other hand in the cookie jar with the threatening, vengeful, angry God that so many of us have grown up with, so many of us came to know so early on, the anxiety, the worry, the fear that comes with that, about walking that very narrow, tight line to avoid that the punishment that will come out of that God. The constriction that comes with that to recognize God in the world, through all the manifold experiences that we have, and to glory, to be grateful for that God.
But why would I hold on to that kind of a God who could be so ambivalent, who might be out to get me in some way? Why would I hold on to him?
Because he's so human.
He's certainly so human, but also I think because I'm in control of him then. If I do the right things, and just enough of them, I win his approval. And part of this second step is letting go of the fact that I have no control over the approval of God. I mean, God approves of me whether I've done very well or haven't.
But experientially, when I said because he is so human in that sense, because that's our human experience, that in order to get approval, there are certain things we always have to do. That's the only way we can get approval.
That's my approval of other humans and of myself as human. And at some point, the second step invites me to kind of lean back like someone in the water and just float and trust that if I look at my life, I will find that God has been with me day in and day out. Maybe not always as I would have liked, but has provided for me, whether I've been good or bad. God doesn't come only to good little boys and girls. That might be Santa Claus, but the second step invites me to look back and see I've been good and I've been bad, and God through it all has been very good to me, much more so than any human person could have been. But then I've got to count all my blessings. And again, we're back on the interplay of the first and second step and the import of gratitude to see God has always been there.
Remember that we are talking about insanity. Now, we have not spoken of insanity in the sense that we ordinarily think of it. We aren't talking here about schizophrenia, manic depressive disease, any of those kinds of clinical, classical forms of insanity. We're talking about essentially normal human beings who, by hooking themselves into systems of thought, behaviors that can produce this delusionary thinking within them, where externally they may seem to be okay, whereas they look at themselves, they seem to be okay, but as they move down that path of delusion, that's the insanity that we are talking about. We're not talking about the insanity that's cured by drugs. We're not talking about the insanity that's cured by electric shock. We're talking about that more universal insanity that we human beings get into so regularly and so often in that journey between life and death. And the recognition that what we're talking about here, and that is that power, that God, that acceptance, if we are willing to give up our investment in those idols, in our ego, in the things that we hang on to so desperately, if we are willing to give that up, then that accepting God is ready to receive us and move us into that sense of peace and tranquility, serenity that we talk about, that we want so badly.
For me, and I think for you, if I'm hearing you correctly, a synonym for that insanity could well be pride. For me, pride is simply a matter of forgetting the truth, forgetting the truth about myself and puffing myself up to think that I am the highest power around. The world is rotating around me. Everything does depend on me. As someone I worked with not too long ago thought, he had to stay awake all night or someone is going to drop the bomb. I mean, that's insane, finally. And sanity is simply coming back to the truth, often painfully coming back in a humiliating way. It's the only way to humility that I know of, is the humiliation of realizing I'm not the center of the universe. I can't bring this off. God is God, and I am not.
And we are here back to the prime, basic human problem that again was evidenced through the story of Adam and Eve. Pride, pride, ego, hanging on to ego, refusal to believe that God has the power to run the world and to run our lives.
Okay. And now you're using ego in a pejorative, negative sense, where you've tried to use it before in a more positive sense of true appreciation of oneself. Would you say something of what you think ego maintenance looks like, good ego maintenance of myself truthful, creature, blessed, God-given, gifted? What does good ego maintenance look like that will really keep the truth about myself going and the second step going?
I think good ego maintenance depends upon self-knowledge. I think we need to know who we are and what we are. We need to know our strengths. We need to know our weaknesses. We need to know our positives and our negatives. And we need to recognize that they are all us. That I am not pure virtue, nor am I pure vice. I'm not pure strength nor pure weakness. Somehow I'm a blend of all of those things, and the recognition and the acceptance of who and what I am. And to have that again be reflective of reality.
You know, George, if there was one person I had to point to within our tradition who I would say just embodies what you have just spoken of, it's Mary. There's no one I'm as aware of who is so knowledgeable and truthful of herself, of God, as Mary. From beginning to end of when we meet her, what does she say? I am the servant of the Lord. If I can get that sentence right, I usually have the second step in place in my own life. When she moves in later on in the first chapter of Luke to be with Elizabeth, she does what for me is second step work, basically. My whole being proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit finds joy in God, my Savior. She has really found her God as saving her. There it is. He has looked upon his servant in her lowliness. In her lowliness, she has the truth about herself. God, who is mighty, has done great things for me. When I get that sentence, the 49th verse of the first chapter of Luke, in place, when I'm able to say it and when my life says it, right across my middle, then I think I'm working the second step pretty well.
I was reflecting as you were reading about how little we know of Mary. She's probably a person who is talked about in the church more than any other mortal. And yet we know very little of her. And obviously the writers of the scripture picked up that the essence of who she was the lack of ego. I mean, I think if we have a historical image of humility in the healthiest sense of the word, we think of Mary. And I think we could think of a lot of people who are the exact opposite, who are so invested in their egos and in their own wishes, their own selfishness, their own gratification. And I think that as we look around us, there are more of those kinds of people. Now, I think the other side to that is that we also recognize all of that in ourselves.
And what that, in a way, it makes that whole moment of Mary and Elizabeth, that whole visitation, a marvelous support group. It's exactly, I think, why people group, to encourage one another in what you've just said. George, we're working the steps. It's good to be with you, my friend. I look forward to the third. Thank you.